Hugh Linehan from the Irish Times sitting in for Matt on The Last Word again this evening. Now, about 21,000 new homes will be needed each year for the next 3 years to meet the demand, according to a new report by the Housing Agency. The Housing Agency also shows that just over 11,000 new homes were made available last year, around 4,000 less than were needed. And it says that the amount of zoned residential land available is capable of supporting 414,000 new homes. So what's the problem, and what kind of prospect is there of Ireland meeting those targets of 21,000 new homes per year? On the line, we have Conor Skehan, Chairman of the Housing Agency. Conor, is there any prospect of us doubling our output so quickly?
It's going to be very challenging, and the reason that the agency is going to put out a report like this every single year is to give people the kind of clear signals about what policy and government have to deliver. I think this is a pretty timely day to be delivering that, and we've just heard Mary Harney say that one of the things that got us into the problems we have is we didn't have enough foresight, and we didn't have enough people giving official warnings when things need to be dealt with and addressed. So every year from now on, Ireland will become like all the rest of the countries in Europe and the United States, who publish an annual statement of housing needs to let the government know what needs to be done from an independent and objective authority. And that's us, and that's what we're going to do.
If the demand is going to be there and there's a fear that the supply is not going to be able to meet it, is that not the definition of a market failure?
It would be a market failure if it was unable to meet it. Saying that it's going to do it less quickly than would be desirable is not satisfactory, but it's not a failure. We know what's happening. We're in control. The measures are in place. Since June of last year, Construction 2020 has been a government initiative aimed at trying to identify, resource and put in place all necessary means to ensure that housing and infrastructure are put where they're needed and when they're needed. That's been followed up by a social housing strategy, which in turn was followed up by a commitment of 3.8 billion, 3,500 million euros to make sure that the social housing that's going to be required in that period can actually be built. So the government put their money where their mouth is.
It is a key issue here, not just the number of homes, but the type of homes, and that will feed into how much capacity there is out there in the industry to build them, but also what the demand is as Irish society changes.
Exactly. I mean, you've really got to the heart of the matter there. You've obviously read the report. I mean, the issue here is to make sure that we recognise that in the years since we stopped building in bulk in 2007, 2008, that the nature of Irish society has changed an awful lot. And during that period, we've gone from a society where the majority of homes accommodated about 3 people down to one that's heading rapidly towards the European norm of about 2.5. And that figure in turn is an average. So what we're finding is that Ireland is probably going to head toward the norms that you get in the United States and in Britain, where about a third of people of homes have just one person living in them.
I'm also joined in studio by Dr. John McCartney. He's Director of Research at Savills Property, and he has a very interesting opinion piece in today's Irish Times. John, this piece arose because there are proposals to, I suppose, ameliorate the very strict regulations which currently exist in the Dublin area, and Dublin, of course, is where there's the highest pressure on demand for housing. And you have some interesting points to make about this, about relaxing the strictures really on what builders are supposed to build.
Well, indeed, Hugh. One of the reasons why we have the housing shortage that we have is that we're not building enough new residential units each year. And one of the reasons that that's the case is that the cost of construction remains very high relative to the price that you can ultimately sell the units for. And if you can't sell the units at a profit, then developers won't build them. So the calls for a sort of a relaxation in the minimum design standards for apartments are motivated by developers who want to get on and develop, and at the moment they can't do that on a commercially viable basis. So they're well intentioned. However, I take a slightly contrarian view in the sense that rather than building more small units, my view is that we probably have enough of those given the demographic profile that we see emerging in society. The number of 20-somethings in Dublin has fallen by an astonishing 29%.
That is incredible figure.
Since 2009. It's absolutely amazing. About a third of that is due to net out migration, but the remainder is actually due to changing fertility patterns in the 1980s. And 20-somethings are the people that are the natural occupants of small residential units. Then you look at the profile of the age cohorts that are actually growing rapidly. We've had a 13% increase in the number of children under 10. Now, by definition, those children live in at least 2-person households. They can't live on their own. So my view is that the demographic pattern of demand really is for more large family units. And in that context, I would question whether it's a good idea to be scaling back on apartment sizes.
So there are a number of regulations, though. Some of them are about the size of apartments. Some of them are about how many bedrooms should be in a number of apartments within a given block, if that block is to be given planning permission. Some of them are about things like how many windows, that an apartment should have a dual aspect that you can see out both sides of it, I suppose, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. And some of these, I think, you would have to say are a little bit over the top. Every apartment in Dublin City Council area has to have a parking space and so forth. This doesn't seem to be, the best idea. And there is certainly scope for revisiting these minimum design standards and looking at things like that. But fundamentally, what we're trying to achieve and what we need to achieve for the sustainable development of the city is a change in the national psyche. We need to break away from the psyche that people can only countenance bringing up a family in a traditional semi-detached house with a garden front and back. And if we're ever going to make that psychological break, what we really need to do is we need to rehabilitate the idea of apartment living as something that's a viable long-term option for families.
Isn't that absolutely a reality, Conor Skean, that Irish people don't take very kindly to the idea of spending their entire life and raising families in apartments? And some of that may be cultural, but some of that may be because of the fact that for many years the only apartments and flats that were being built were shoeboxes with one window.
I think any observations about how Irish people are like or are not like is a thing that we need to be increasingly careful about doing. That's one of the reasons we're going to carry out this report every single year. Irish society isn't just changing demographically. The values, the things that people think are important are changed dramatically as well. And those dramatic changes in values, those dramatic changes in demographics, and John, it was a fantastic article, congratulations, raise issues that tell us that we have to be very, very vigilant to watch those changes, because changes in values in particular change everything. So there's a whole generation of people out there who've been brought up in Sex and the City, and they're going to stay living in apartments downtown for much longer than any previous generation. There's the baby boomers who at 65 this year, the baby boomers are starting to retire. They're the wealthiest, probably the best educated generation of Irish people who've ever been at that age. They're going to make very different changes. Myself and Mark and Sir did a couple of years ago suggested that the house you're in at the age of 45 is the house you're probably going to die in. That's not going to happen in the future. The baby boomers are going to move. They're going to downsize. They're going to go to places where they've got walkable connectivity to shops and Lewis and all those kinds of stuff. So I think we'd be very, very careful about making generalisations about what Irish people are and what it is we value, because whatever you say today will almost definitely be different tomorrow.
John, I suppose one of the things I wonder, and I'm talking about Dublin, but of course these issues apply particularly to the urban centres. If you're landing back into Dublin Airport and you look out the window, what I see is probably the lowest rise city in Europe nearly, with vast amounts of green space dotted across it, whether it be private lands or public lands or whatever it is. And, the question does arise, it can't just be about building costs. There's something funny going on with the supply of land as well.
Well, I think it has a lot to do with the planning constraints that exist within the four local authorities of Dublin. If you look at the housing construction that is taking place, and it's very limited across the board, but where we do see activity, it's in the fringe counties of Wicklow, Meath and Kildare. So that, I think, tells us something.
But isn't that part of what's called this donut effect of creating these, what we call those counties commuter counties now? And you have people, then you have traffic clogged motorways where people should really be living closer to where they work.
Absolutely, Hugh. And this is really part of my point, that people are moving to Wicklow, Meath and Kildare because they're making the trade-off of having to accept the commute in order to get more space, because the type of accommodation that they want in order to bring up their families is just not available in the four local authority areas of Dublin, partly because the local authorities won't allow developers to build family type of units. And my suggestion is that part of a solution to this problem is to actually maintain minimum apartment standards and sizes and design quality and so forth, to attract those people that are currently migrating out to the suburbs, to bring them back into town, to reduce that urban sprawl. But in order for us to do that successfully, we need to address the fact that building apartments is more expensive than building housing, because you can't scale apartment development the way you can with housing. In the world of house building, you can build a show house and you can start collecting collecting cash through deposits, and you can then stage the development over time. You can't really do that with apartments. You have to build them all in one go, so you have to take on higher levels of peak debt. And also the excavation of the double basement car park and all of that sort of stuff adds very significantly to costs.
So the per unit cost, that surprises me. The per unit cost of building apartments in terms of their floor space is higher than that of a semi-detached house?
Yeah, it depends scheme to scheme, but generally speaking, apartments per square metre are more expensive to develop than housing.
Conor, finally, in relation to that, are there any measures that you think we should be taking, or the government should be taking, to encourage things to go the way you want them to go?
Again, we're not an agency who tell people what to do. We tell them what the options are and what the information is. And I'm sorry to go back and burst people's bubble, but what the agency is going to be doing from now on is telling people facts to dislodge comfortable myths. The reality, just going back to the thing about you saying there's something funny going on with land, one of the first things the agency showed was there's an immediate short-term capacity for 46,000 units in Dublin. 46,000, that's 4 years' supply. And then there's 18,000 unbuilt permissions, that's 2 years' supply just sitting there in the city, shovel-ready, and more zoned land for another 25,000 in the Dublin region. Hugh, we're not short of land. We're not short of land, we're not short of permissions. What we are short of is people getting out there and starting to build the stuff. That's what we're short of. It's a much more complex knot to unpick because of issues to do with traditional models of funding that the builders are still clinging to, and issues to do with their confidence in the banks to lend to those people. They're the real issues we have to deal with. But Hugh, the problem isn't land.
Well, there's some very clear facts. Thanks very much to Conor Skehan of the Housing Agency and to Dr. John McCartney, Director of Research at Savills. We're going to go over now to Today FM senior reporter Juliet Gash, because she is outside Cloverhill Prison. Juliet, good evening.
Good evening, Hugh.
Can you tell me what's been going on there? We heard a brief report in the news of further disturbances and an injury.
That's right. I've seen three ambulances leave in the past 15 minutes or so from Cloverhill Prison, and some paramedics are just leaving now as I'm talking to you on the phone. It centres around a